I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't even hesitate. I stood when my name was called and watched my daughter's carefully built world begin to crack in real time. My name is Thomas Hale. I'm 74 years old. And 3 nights ago, inside a chandelier-lit ballroom packed with nearly 400 of the most influential physicians in New Haven, I became the man my daughter had spent years pretending never existed. The applause didn't fade. It died. Because the moment they realized who I was, everything changed. My daughter, Dr. Lila Hale Morrison, is not an ordinary surgeon. She's a prodigy in pediatric neurosurgery. The kind who takes cases other doctors quietly refuse. The kind who's quoted in medical journals, flown across the country to speak at conferences, and praised as the future of her field at Eastbrook Medical Center, one of the most elite hospitals on the East Coast. She saves children for a living. What no one in that room knew, what she was certain would never surface, was that every major research breakthrough attributed to her exceptional philanthropic support had been quietly funded by me. Her father, the man she told colleagues had passed away years ago, standing behind that podium, fingers curled around a microphone I'd never expected to touch. I felt decades of invisible labor settle into my bones. These hands had never held surgical instruments. They'd held cardboard boxes, grocery crates, and rolled coins after closing shifts. And yet, they were the hands that paid for the work everyone in that room admired. I didn't need to look at my daughter to know what she was feeling. I could see it anyway. First came confusion, her smile faltering as she scanned the stage. Then disbelief, her posture stiffening as recognition set in. And finally, something far more dangerous. Fear. Because this wasn't part of her story. And it certainly wasn't part of her plan. Ladies and gentlemen, the host had said moments earlier, glowing beneath crystal lights, tonight we honor not only extraordinary medical brilliance, but extraordinary generosity. My daughter smiled from her table, radiant, relaxed. This was her night. For over 5 years, he continued, an anonymous donor has contributed more than $1.9 million to pediatric brain cancer research here at Eastbrook. This support has transformed lives. And tonight, that donor has chosen to step forward. That's when he said my name. I rose slowly. Not to make a point, my knees simply needed a moment. I didn't glance in my daughter's direction as I walked toward the stage, but I could feel her stare burning through the room. I wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit and shoes older than some of the residents seated in the front rows. The room was so quiet I could hear glasses settle against white linen. These were people who commanded operating rooms, grants, and legacies. And now they were listening to me. My wife, Eleanor, died in this hospital, I said evenly. Room 517. 5 years ago. Brain cancer. A ripple moved through the crowd. She was a school librarian. She believed in helping quietly, in giving without being seen. I swallowed once before continuing. She made me promise 2 things before she passed. First, that I would always take care of our daughter. And second, that her death wouldn't be meaningless. I paused, steadying myself. I kept both promises. That was when the truth came out. The donations you've been applauding tonight, I said, were made by me, privately, in my wife's memory, to support the research led by my daughter, who, just last week, asked me not to attend her birthday dinner because my presence would reflect poorly on her professional image. The room inhaled as one. I didn't accuse her. I didn't attack her. I simply told the truth and let it land where it landed. But the reveal didn't start that evening. It began 3 days earlier, in my kitchen, with a pot of soup warming on the stove and a phone call that finally showed me where I stood. I live alone in a modest 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city. Rent-controlled. Quiet. The kind of place people pass without noticing. My car is a 2006 Toyota with a dented door and a radio that only picks up one station clearly if you hold the dial just right. Lila lives 15 minutes away in a gated community with a circular driveway and a kitchen larger than my entire apartment. We used to speak every Sunday. Used to. That Tuesday evening, she called while I was reheating leftovers. "Dad," she said, her voice precise, distant. "I need to talk to you." I already knew. "My birthday's next week," I said softly. "I thought maybe we could." "No," she interrupted. "That's what this is about." I waited. "There's a conference that weekend," she said. "Major donors. Board members. People who matter." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Dinner doesn't have to be fancy. It's not about dinner, she replied. It's about optics. Optics. The word stayed with me. Lila, I said carefully, are you saying you don't want to be seen with me? Silence. Then, quietly, I think it's better if we keep our lives separate. Separate. That was the moment I understood, not just that she was embarrassed, but how long she had been. What she didn't know was that I'd already made a choice. What she didn't know was that the envelope in my desk drawer, filled with bank statements, donation records, and legal documents, was no longer just a safety net. And what she definitely didn't know was that the money she believed would one day secure her future was no longer hers. As I stepped down from the stage that night, applause swelling behind me, I finally looked at my daughter. She hadn't moved. She was still standing, frozen, and for the first time in years, she wasn't looking past me. She was looking at me, and she was afraid. People assume sacrifice announces itself. It doesn't. Most of the time, it looks like routine, like unlocking the same door every morning, like long days that blur together, like doing what needs to be done so often that it stops feeling like a decision at all. For most of my life, I stood behind a counter. I owned a small neighborhood supply store on the south side of New Haven. Nothing special. Milk, bread, batteries, lottery tickets, notebooks for kids who came in after school. The bell above the door rang so often I stopped hearing it. That store paid for my daughter's childhood. It covered winter coats and dentist bills, school lunches, and overdue library fees. It paid for the microscope she begged for at 13, the one she kept on her desk and cleaned like it was sacred. Eleanor used to lean against the counter during slow afternoons and watch Lila study. This isn't where she'll end up, she'd say. This is just where she's passing through. Lila was focused in a way I recognized early. Not loud, not flashy. She didn't wait to be told to work. She just did. Homework finished before dinner. Questions written down instead of forgotten. She learned patience by watching customers argue over pennies. Learned math by making change faster than I could. When she got into college, Eleanor cried. When she was accepted to medical school, Eleanor cried again, this time with her hand over her mouth, like she couldn't quite believe it. When Eleanor died during Lila's residency, I didn't cry then either. I was on hold with the insurance company, listening to recorded music, trying to understand a form that needed to be signed by the end of the week. Medical school doesn't just cost money. It consumes it. Tuition was only the headline. There were exam fees. Step 2 alone was nearly $700. Interview flights. Hotel rooms booked last minute. Textbooks replaced annually. Prep courses everyone swore were optional, but somehow mandatory. Lila never asked where the money came from. She assumed I had it handled. By her 3rd year, I didn't. I remember the night clearly. The store was closed. The register was balanced. The ledger sat open on the counter while the calculator blinked back at me like it was waiting for an answer I didn't have. Another tuition increase. Final year. No room to stall. 3 weeks later, I taped a for sale sign inside the front window. No announcement. No goodbye. The store sold quietly to a distributor who didn't ask questions. 30 years folded into a single transaction. Every dollar went to Lila's education. When I told her the payment went through, she hugged me and said, I'll pay you back someday. I told her she didn't have to. And I meant it. At first, that was enough. The change didn't arrive all at once. It came in small omissions. She stopped inviting me to events, then stopped mentioning me at all. The first time I noticed was at Eastbrook. I'd come by to drop off updated insurance paperwork, forms that still listed me as her emergency contact. I waited near the lobby while she gave a tour to visiting physicians. One of them smiled and said, Your family must be proud. She didn't hesitate. My parents passed away years ago, she said. But yes, this work honors them. I stayed where I was. I didn't correct her. I just stood there holding the envelope until the conversation moved on. After that, it became easier for her. In interviews, she called herself self-made. At conferences, she spoke about mentors instead of origins. At dinners, if she acknowledged me at all, it was by my first name. Not father, just Thomas. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love didn't need acknowledgement. After Eleanor died, I began donating to cancer research. At first, the amounts were small, then larger, always anonymous, always directed toward pediatric brain tumors, always toward Lila's department. I wasn't trying to guide her career. I wasn't trying to buy influence. Grief needs somewhere to go. I thought I was helping. What I didn't realize was that by staying invisible, I was teaching her that I could be erased without consequence, that I was optional. So when she said, carefully, professionally, that it was better if we kept our lives separate, I finally stopped pretending I didn't understand. That night, I opened the desk drawer. I laid out the bank statements, the donation records, the documents I'd never shown anyone. And for the first time, I didn't tell myself it was enough just to love her. Because some sacrifices need to be acknowledged, and some lessons don't arrive gently. By the time I closed the drawer, I knew what came next. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just after 6. I know because the clock on my microwave still reads 6:02, frozen mid-blink from a power outage I never bothered to fix. I was at the counter, stirring soup that had been on too long, the surface thickening as if it had decided I wasn't coming back to it. I didn't expect her to call. We hadn't spoken in nearly 3 weeks. Not since the hospital, not since I stood there with an envelope in my hands while she erased me with a sentence delivered as evenly as a prognosis. When the phone rang, I let it go once before answering. "Dad," she said. Her voice was composed, neutral, the same tone she used when she wanted a conversation to sound reasonable, even if it wasn't. "How are you?" I glanced at the pot, then at the microwave clock. "I'm fine." There was a pause. Not awkward. Intentional. "I need to talk to you about something." I already knew. "My birthday's next week," I said. 74. "I was thinking we could go to that Italian place near the harbor. Early dinner." She exhaled softly. "That's what I'm calling about." I turned the heat down and sat at the kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner and 2 chairs, though only one ever got used. "There's a symposium that weekend," she said. "It's important. Department heads, donors, board members." "That's okay," I said. "We can pick another day." "No," she replied. "That's not what I mean." The soup bubbled behind me. "These people," she continued, "they're very particular. About presentation. About who they associate with." I waited. "Dad," she said carefully, "I don't think it's a good idea for you to be there." "At dinner?" I asked. "At all." I folded my hands together on the table. "Why?" Another pause. "Because it complicates things." I thought of the apartment, the car, the coat I'd worn through 10 winters. "Complicates how?" She hesitated, then said it. "You don't really fit into this world." There it was. "Lila," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Are you embarrassed by me?" Silence. Long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "I wouldn't use that word," she said finally. "What word would you use?" She sighed. "I'm trying to protect my career." "From what?" I asked. "From assumptions," she said. "From distractions. From people thinking I came from nothing." "Nothing." "I came from you," I said. "Yes," she replied quickly, "and I'm grateful. But gratitude doesn't change reality." "And what's the reality?" I asked. "That your life doesn't align with mine anymore." The soup burned. I stood and turned off the stove, though I wasn't hungry. "So what are you asking?" I said. "I'm asking you not to expect anything for your birthday," she said. "No dinner. No celebration. It's not a good time." "My birthday," I repeated. "The same day your mother and I got married." She didn't answer. "I don't need a party," I said. "I just thought." "Dad," she interrupted, firmer now. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I let out a short breath. "I'm not the one doing that." "Please," she said. "Don't put me in a position where I have to choose." "Choose what?" "Between my family and my future." I looked around the kitchen. The table. The single chair. Eleanor's photograph on the shelf by the window. "I already made that choice," I said. "A long time ago." She didn't respond. "Just don't come," she said. "It's better this way." I didn't ask better for whom. "I understand," I said. Her relief was immediate. "Thank you." Before she could hang up, I said her name. "Yes." "You told people your parents were dead." She inhaled sharply. "That's not fair." "Is it true?" "It was easier," she said. "I didn't think it mattered." I closed my eyes. "I see," I said. "Then I won't matter." "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "It's what you said." Silence again. "Good night, Dad," she said. The line went dead. I stayed at the table long after the call ended. The soup cooled on the stove. The microwave clock blinked, then stopped again. I went to the desk and opened the drawer. The folder was where it always was. Receipts, bank statements, donation confirmations, legal documents I'd signed without imagining I'd ever need to use them. I spread them across the table, not to count the money, to count the years. Years of quiet mistaken for compliance. Years of absence mistaken for insignificance. I heard Eleanor's voice, not loud, not pleading, just steady. Don't let her forget where she came from. I picked up the phone again. This time, I didn't call my daughter. I dialed a number I'd memorized years earlier and never expected to use. When the line connected, I said, "This is Thomas Hale. I think it's time we stopped being anonymous." There was a pause. Then, "Mr. Hale, are you certain?" I looked at the papers on the table. "Yes," I said. "I am." Decisions are quieter than people think. They don't arrive with speeches or certainty. They arrive while you're still wearing yesterday's clothes, still moving through a life that hasn't caught up to what you've decided. The morning after the call, I woke up at 5 like I always did. Same routine, same silence. I made coffee I didn't finish and sat at the table with the folder still spread where I'd left it. Overnight, the papers hadn't changed, but the numbers no longer read like amounts. They read like timestamps. 5 years of donations. 5 years of letting someone else tell my story. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. What I felt was settled. At 9 o'clock, I called Marion Foster, the attorney who'd handled my affairs since Eleanor was still alive. She answered on the second ring. "Thomas," she said, "this is unexpected. I need to make changes," I told her. There was a pause. Not concern, not alarm. Just attention. "Come in," she said. Today, her office was quiet and orderly. Marion listened without interrupting as I explained what had happened. Not dramatically, not defensively. Just the facts. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Does your daughter know about the donations?" "No." "And the trust?" "No." She nodded once. "Then we should be precise." We went through the documents slowly. The trust established years earlier. The clauses I'd never expected to use. I didn't erase my daughter from anything. I redirected. Educational scholarships, I said. First-generation students. Medicine. Research. People who remember. Marion didn't argue. She didn't praise me. "This will be final," she said. "I know." That afternoon, I called the hospital's development office. For years, I'd existed there as a donor number and a neutral email address. When I gave my name, the woman on the line went quiet. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "are you calling about your contributions?" "I am," I said. "I won't be anonymous anymore." She asked if I was sure. "Yes," I said. The gala was already scheduled. Annual. Predictable. Safe. I asked to attend. There was a brief hesitation, then professional warmth. Seating arrangements. Dress code. Confirmation email. They didn't ask why. That night, I went through my closet. Most of what I owned belonged to another version of my life. Practical, worn, chosen to disappear into rooms rather than occupy them. I set aside the suit I'd borrowed before. It felt dishonest to wear someone else's version of me. The next morning, I went downtown. I didn't buy extravagantly. I bought deliberately. A navy suit. Clean lines. Well-made. Shoes that fit. A tie Eleanor would have approved of. Simple, understated. It was about not apologizing. In the days that followed, I made smaller calls. Accountant. Bank. Foundation administrator. Each conversation removed another layer of invisibility I'd grown accustomed to wearing. "Oh," they seemed to say, "you're real." I didn't call Lila. I didn't warn her. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. If she was willing to erase me publicly, she could meet me publicly as well. The night before the gala, I opened Eleanor's jewelry box. Inside was the hospital bracelet she'd worn during her last week. I'd kept it folded for years, unable to throw it away, unwilling to look at it too closely. I placed it in my jacket pocket. Not as a gesture, as a reminder. The day arrived without ceremony. I dressed slowly, buttoned my shirt, adjusted the cuffs, looked at myself in the mirror longer than usual. Not to admire, to recognize. At the venue, staff moved efficiently. Guests arrived in waves. Quiet laughter, measured confidence, money disguised as taste. At the check-in desk, the woman scanned her list. "Mr. Hale," she said, then smiled. "Welcome." I was escorted to my table. Front section. Close enough to see faces clearly. Across the room, Lila moved between groups with practiced ease. Confident. Polished. Untouchable. She hadn't seen me yet. I placed my hands on the tablecloth. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to arrange. Nothing left to soften. Nothing left to hide. When the lights dimmed and the host stepped forward, I didn't feel nervous. I felt finished. Finished waiting. Finished protecting. Finished pretending silence was kindness. Whatever came next would happen in full view. And this time, I wouldn't disappear. Galas have a rhythm. Arrivals first, measured, rehearsed. Laughter held a second too long. Handshakes that linger until names are confirmed. People scanning the room while pretending not to. I watched it all from my seat. The lighting was designed to flatter. Tables arranged to suggest intimacy while keeping real distance intact. Glassware fractured the chandeliers into smaller, softer versions of themselves. Across the room, Lila was exactly where she belonged. She moved easily between clusters of colleagues, posture relaxed, smile precise. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, people leaned in. Heads nodded. Someone took notes on a phone and slipped it back into a jacket pocket. This was her element. I'd watched this version of her develop over years, polished by conferences, sharpened by competition, refined by the understanding that visibility mattered almost as much as competence. She wore a dark dress that suggested restraint rather than expense. Hair swept back, jewelry minimal. Nothing chosen to draw attention to itself. Nothing accidental. At her table, she laughed at the right moments. Touched a colleague's arm briefly while making a point. Accepted compliments without deflecting them, without holding on to them too long. I noticed how often she checked the room. Not for me. For alignment. For reassurance that everything was proceeding as expected. The host stepped to the podium. His voice was smooth, familiar. Applause rose and settled. Plates were cleared with quiet efficiency. Conversations softened as wine did its work. I stayed where I was. A few people at nearby tables glanced at me, curious. I returned their looks politely. No one asked questions. No one needed to yet. At Lila's table, a man leaned in and said something that made her smile widen. She nodded, grateful, almost deferential. I recognized the look. That was ambition being fed. She deserved her success. That had never been in question. My disappointment didn't come from envy or resentment. It came from knowing how hard she'd worked and how unnecessary the erasure had been. She hadn't needed to pretend. She'd chosen to. The first award of the evening was announced. Applause. A brief speech. Photos taken near the stage. Lila clapped enthusiastically. Professional. Supportive. When she stood to greet someone passing behind her chair, I saw her scan the room again. And this time, her eyes landed on me. Only for a moment. Her smile faltered. Not vanished. Not cracked. Interrupted. She didn't recognize me at first. I looked different than the version she'd stored away. The suit fit. My posture was straight. I wasn't trying to disappear. Recognition arrived in stages. Confusion. Calculation. Alarm. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and turned slightly, angling her body away as if distance alone might correct the problem. She hadn't expected me. I met her gaze without waving, without smiling, just present. Her eyes flicked to the host, then to the stage, then back to me. Whatever she'd planned for this night, I wasn't part of it. The host returned to the microphone. Tonight, he said, we have the privilege of recognizing extraordinary commitment, not only in medicine, but in service. Lila straightened without thinking. This was the phrasing that usually preceded her name. I watched her inhale slowly, steadying herself. Her colleagues turned toward her with anticipatory smiles. Someone touched her shoulder. Another leaned in to whisper congratulations before they were officially warranted. She smiled back, composed, but tension had gathered at the corners of her mouth. The host continued. Years of dedication. Breakthroughs. Impact. The familiar structure of achievement. Lila nodded along, accepting the narrative she'd helped shape. Then he paused. Not a mistake. A choice. And before we honor tonight's recipient, he said, we want to acknowledge the generosity that made much of this work possible. Lila's smile stiffened. That wasn't the order she expected. Around the room, conversation stopped. Glasses were set down. Attention sharpened. For years, the host continued, our pediatric research program has benefited from the quiet support of an anonymous contributor. Lila glanced sideways, a quick movement she probably didn't realize she'd made. She knew this part, or thought she did. Tonight, he said, that contributor has agreed to be recognized publicly. The room leaned in. Lila's expression shifted, not fear yet, but uncertainty. Her jaw tightened, then released. She was recalculating. I sat very still. The host smiled at the audience. Some of you may be surprised, he said, but generosity doesn't always look the way we expect. I felt Eleanor's bracelet against my wrist. Lila searched the room again, this time deliberately. She found me. Her breath caught. Just enough. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Yet, the host looked down at his card. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please join me in welcoming." The room held its breath. And for the first time that evening, Lila didn't look composed. She looked unprepared, not because she didn't deserve the honor that was coming, but because she finally understood this night wasn't only about her. And whatever happened next would not stay contained. The host cleared his throat. It was a small sound, barely audible, but in the quiet it landed like a cue. Programs stopped rustling. Forks paused midair. Conversations ended mid-sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, reading from the card in his hand, "please join me in welcoming the benefactor whose generosity has shaped our pediatric research program for the past 5 years." He looked up. "Mr. Thomas Hale." For a moment, nothing happened. Not confusion. Stillness. Then heads began to turn, slowly at first, then all at once. The movement spread outward from the stage, a ripple searching for its source. I stood. Not quickly, not reluctantly, just enough to be seen. The host stepped back from the microphone, smiling toward me, unaware, or only dimly aware, of what had just shifted in the room. Applause began somewhere behind me. Polite, uncertain. It grew as people searched their programs, scanned the tables, adjusted their understanding. A donor was a donor. Applause followed. I walked toward the stage. The distance felt longer than it was. Each step sounded louder than it should have. I could feel eyes tracking me, curiosity sharpening into attention. I didn't look at Lila. I didn't need to. At the podium, the host handed me the microphone with a practiced nod. The applause faded. People settled back, prepared for gratitude. "My name is Thomas Hale," I said. "Thank you for the recognition." My voice didn't shake. "I didn't plan to speak tonight," I continued, "but I was asked if I wanted to say a few words." I paused. "I do." A few smiles appeared. This was familiar ground. "My wife, Eleanor, died in this hospital 5 years ago," I said. "Room 517. Brain cancer." The room changed. Doctors understood rooms. Numbers. Endpoints. She believed in giving quietly, I continued. In doing what needed to be done without being seen. I let that sit. When she died, I made 2 promises. One, to take care of our daughter. The other, that her death would matter. I adjusted my grip on the microphone. I kept both. The room stayed silent. "For the past 5 years," I said, "I've donated to pediatric brain cancer research here at Eastbrook. Anonymously. In my wife's memory." Heads nodded. This still made sense. "The work those funds supported saved lives," I said. "That's what mattered to me." I stopped. "But there's something else you should know." I turned then, not to the audience. To Lila. She was still standing, one hand resting on the back of her chair. Her face had gone very still, as if expression itself had been paused. "The research you're honoring tonight," I said, "was led by my daughter." A murmur moved through the room. "Dr. Lila Hale Morrison." The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was understanding. People looked from me to her, then back again. Faces recalibrated. Postures shifted. Someone near the aisle lowered their phone without realizing they'd raised it. "My daughter is an exceptional surgeon," I said. "She earned her skill. She earned her reputation." I paused. "But last week," I continued, "she asked me not to attend her birthday dinner." The room leaned forward. "She told me my presence would complicate her professional life, that it was better if our worlds stayed separate." Lila didn't look away. "I'm not sharing this to shame her," I said. "I'm sharing it because truth doesn't stop existing when it becomes inconvenient." A chair scraped quietly somewhere behind me. "I was told not to expect anything," I went on. "No dinner. No acknowledgement." The silence thickened. "For years," I said, "I stayed quiet. I thought love meant stepping back." I looked out at the room. I was wrong. That was all. "Tonight is my birthday," I said. 74 years. A few people inhaled. "And earlier today," I continued, "I finalized the establishment of a scholarship fund in my wife's name for first-generation medical students." A ripple moved through the crowd. "The funds that would have gone to my daughter," I said evenly, "will now go there." Lila flinched. "Just once." "I will always love my child," I said. "That hasn't changed. But love without honesty isn't kindness." The room was completely still. I handed the microphone back to the host. "Thank you," I said. and stepped away. The applause didn't come immediately. When it did, it wasn't polite. It was uneven, earnest, uncontrolled. As I walked back to my table, voices rose in low clusters. People leaned toward one another. Phones appeared and disappeared. At Lila's table, no one spoke. She remained standing, eyes fixed on the stage I'd just left. Not humiliated. Seen. I sat down. For the first time that night, my hands shook. Not from regret. From release. What I'd said couldn't be withdrawn. What she'd hidden could no longer be hidden for her. The room would decide the rest. Consequences rarely announce themselves. They arrive in pauses. In looks held a moment too long. In conversations that resume without you in them. I noticed it before I heard it. As the applause settled and the host thanked everyone for their generosity, the room didn't return to its earlier rhythm. People stayed seated longer than necessary. Conversations restarted carefully, as if everyone sensed something fragile had entered the space. At my table, a woman I didn't know leaned slightly toward me. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. "Your wife." "Thank you," I replied. She nodded once, as if completing an exchange she'd prepared for, and turned back to her companion. Across the room, Lila still stood, not frozen, deciding. Someone at her table reached for her arm. She didn't notice. Another leaned in to whisper something, then stopped. I watched the space around her widen. Not suddenly. Gradually. A colleague she'd been laughing with earlier caught her eye, hesitated, then offered a careful smile that didn't quite land. Another checked a phone that didn't need checking. Someone excused themselves from the table altogether. No one said anything unkind. They didn't have to. The program continued. Awards were presented. Speeches delivered. The machinery of the evening absorbed the disruption and moved on. But it didn't erase what had been said. When dinner resumed, voices were lower. Names were offered with more care. The room had adjusted, and everyone was finding new footing. Lila finally sat. Her posture was unchanged, shoulders back, chin level, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was waiting. For the end. For release. I didn't go to her. I stayed where I was. That mattered. As the final plates were cleared, the conversations thinned. People gathered coats and offered polite goodbyes. A few stopped by my table, briefly, respectfully. Words like generous, principled, moving were offered. None of them stayed. They didn't need to. Near the coat check, a younger physician met my eye. "That took courage," he said. I nodded. It took time. Outside, the air was cool and clean. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting the noise fade behind me. My phone vibrated. Once. Then again. I didn't check it until I was in the car. 3 messages. 2 missed calls. All from Lila. I didn't respond. Not yet. The next morning unfolded as mornings always do. Coffee brewed. Buses ran. People went to work. But the ripple had traveled. By noon, the hospital's development office called. "Mr. Hale," the woman said, careful but warm. "I wanted to follow up about last night." "Yes," I said. "There's been significant interest," she continued. "In the scholarship." "My wife's," I said. She paused. "Of course." Emails followed. Invitations. Requests for clarification that weren't really about details. It felt institutional. The system adjusting. Later that afternoon, Lila called again. This time, I answered. "Dad," she said. Her voice was thinner now. Unpracticed. "Can we talk?" "Yes," I said. "We can." A breath on the line. "Not like this." "In person." "Where?" I asked. "My office," she said, then hesitated. "Or wherever you want." That hesitation mattered. "We'll meet somewhere neutral," I said. "Tomorrow morning." She agreed immediately. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The folder was gone. The drawer empty. The room felt quieter for it. I thought about Eleanor. Not the hospital. Not the illness. Her laugh when Lila insisted on wearing mismatched socks to school. Her certainty when she said our daughter would find her way, no matter where she started. That evening, a clip appeared online. Not the whole speech. Enough. By morning, it had spread. The responses were divided, as they always are. Praise. Condemnation. Arguments about family, gratitude, and whether private truths belong in public rooms. I didn't read much of it. It wasn't written for me. What mattered was slower. By the end of the week, Lila's name appeared in fewer emails. Meetings shifted. Invitations softened into "we'll circle back." Nothing was revoked. Nothing needed to be. Institutions rarely punish. They reconsider. On Friday afternoon, Lila left a message. I didn't realize, she said. I didn't think it would go this far. I listened once. Then again. She wasn't asking for money. She was asking for footing. That night, I stood by the window and watched traffic move through the intersection below. Headlights. Brake lights. People going where they expected to go, until something changed. I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't vindicated. I was calm. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't keep working loudly. It works steadily. Tomorrow, I would see my daughter. Not as a benefactor. Not as a liability. As a father who had finally stopped pretending he didn't exist. We met at a cafe neither of us usually went to. Lila arrived first. I knew because when I walked in, she was already standing, half risen from her chair, unsure whether to greet me like a colleague or a daughter. We settled for neither. Dad, she said. Lila, I replied. We sat. Cups were placed on the table. Steam rose. No one paid attention to us. I didn't realize, she said. I didn't think it would go that far. I know, I said. She looked up. How can you be so sure? Because if you had realized, I said, you wouldn't have needed to. She nodded once and looked down at her hands. I didn't think erasing you would feel like erasing myself, she said. I let that stand. I'm not here to punish you, I said. If I were, you wouldn't be sitting here. That landed harder than explanation would have. I'm sorry, she said. Not just for the birthday. I waited. For all of it. I believe you, I said. But apology isn't the same as repair. She didn't argue. Tell me what repair looks like, she said. That matters, I said. So I'll be clear. She listened. You don't get to decide when I exist. I let the silence hold. If we have a relationship, I continued, it happens openly. Not selectively. Not when it's convenient. She nodded. Slowly. And the money? She asked. There is no the money, I said. That's finished. She accepted that without protest. What happens now? She asked. Now we start smaller, I said. She waited. You introduce me as your father, I said. Not as a donor. Not as an explanation. Her eyes filled slightly. She didn't look away. And you don't use my story to fix what broke, I added. You fix it by living differently. I can do that, she said. You can try, I replied. We stood to leave. There was no hug. At the door, she paused. Will you come to dinner sometime? Yes, I said. If you invite me. I will, she said. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no public statements. No corrections. No performances meant to soften what couldn't be softened. There were introductions. This is my father. Said plainly. There were moments where she hesitated, then chose not to. That mattered more than getting it right. Her career didn't end. It shifted. Some doors closed. Others opened more slowly. Ones that didn't require editing the past to walk through them. The scholarship moved forward. Applications arrived. Brief stories. Unadorned. Parents who'd worked nights. Kids who understood cost before prestige. Eleanor's name appeared where it belonged. One evening, Lila called. I introduced you today, she said. To whom? A resident, she replied. I told him you sold your store to put me through school. And he said it was the most impressive credential in the room. I didn't comment. On my 75th birthday, she took me to dinner. Nothing elaborate. A table by the window. Food we both liked. When the server asked what we were celebrating, she answered without pause. My dad, she said. I raised my glass. To learning, I said. And to not forgetting, she replied. That was enough. Some lessons are expensive. The important ones always are.